I'll never forget that evening. A cascade of ordinary moments leading to a revelation that shattered everything I thought I knew. My name is Alex, just a guy trying to keep his family afloat, juggling a high-pressure job, and the dream of putting my daughter through college. But that day, the house of cards I'd built collapsed in an instant. I came home early, a rare luxury in my schedule, and I thought it'd be nice to surprise Maggie, my 17-year-old, with her favorite sushi for dinner. My wife, Laura, wouldn't be back until later. She was supposedly volunteering at a local nonprofit, as she often did on Thursdays. The house was quiet, but I could hear Maggie's voice faintly from upstairs. I followed it, the rhythm of her words catching my attention. "No, Dad still has no idea," she said, her tone conspiratorial. There was a pause. "Yeah, Uncle Bob even picks me up from school sometimes. Mom and he are planning to move to Cali once Dad covers my college tuition." I froze. My grip on the takeout bag tightened as her words settled over me like a suffocating fog. Uncle Bob? Laura's older brother? He'd been around a lot recently, helping with home repairs, joining us for dinners, even staying overnight a few times under the guise of convenience. But now, Maggie's voice was painting a sinister picture, one I didn't want to believe. I pushed open her door without knocking. Maggie's eyes widened, her complexion draining to a ghostly white. She dropped her phone onto the bed as if she'd been caught handling contraband. "Dad," she started, her voice trembling. "What the hell are you talking about, Maggie?" I demanded, my voice sharp enough to cut through steel. "Planning to move to California? Uncle Bob? What's going on?" She stammered, grasping for words. Her betrayal was written all over her face. I didn't need her to explain. My gut already knew. I turned on my heel and walked out, ignoring her frantic calls of, "Dad, wait, I can explain." Downstairs, I slumped into my office chair, breathing hard. My thoughts raced like a torrent. Laura, my wife of 20 years. Laura, the woman I had loved, supported, and trusted implicitly. Was she really doing this? With her own brother? Number. That didn't make sense. I opened a browser and logged into our shared phone plan account. Years of trust had made me complacent about checking up on her, but now I had a reason. Sure enough, hundreds of calls and texts between Laura and Bob were there, at all hours, day and night. Jesus Christ. And Maggie, she had known. My daughter had been complicit. I leaned back, bile rising in my throat. My chest ached with betrayal. I'd spent the last 2 years working overtime, skipping vacations, breaking my back for their comfort and security. They'd let me. They'd smiled and laughed at my jokes at dinner while plotting behind my back. By the time Laura walked in later that night, I was ready. "Alex, I'm home," she called cheerfully from the entryway. Her heels clicked against the hardwood as she made her way toward the kitchen. I followed her silently, my steps measured. She turned, startled by my presence. "Oh, hey, I didn't know you'd be home early," she said, her tone casual but slightly guarded. "What's up?" I stepped closer, holding up my phone with the call logs displayed. Her face hardened instantly. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice steady. For a moment, she didn't respond. Then, she crossed her arms, her demeanor shifting to icy defiance. "You were snooping on me?" "That's your defense?" I shot back. "You're sleeping with your brother and planning to move to California on my dime, and your first concern is my snooping?" Laura's eyes flickered, but she didn't deny it. "Bob and I, it's complicated, Alex. You wouldn't understand." "Try me," she scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You've been so busy working, so busy being the provider, you forgot how to be a husband. Bob listens to me. He cares about me. You're just a paycheck." The words sliced through me, but they were a gift in a way. They freed me from the web of lies I'd been entangled in. "Is that right?" I said softly. I reached into my pocket and placed a small envelope on the counter. "Then here's your paycheck." She frowned, opening the envelope cautiously. Inside was a note that read, "All accounts emptied. Credit cards canceled. Tuition payments stopped. Good luck in California." "What the hell is this?" she hissed, her voice rising. "It's your reality now," I said, my tone cold. I've been nothing but loyal to you and this family. But you don't deserve me. Neither of you." I didn't wait for her reply. I grabbed my packed duffel bag from the hall and walked out the door. Behind me, I could hear her yelling my name, but it didn't matter anymore. Before leaving, I left one final surprise in the kitchen. An old photo of our family, shattered and scattered across the table. The note underneath read, "This is what you destroyed." As I drove into the night, I felt the weight lifting, the chains breaking. I had lost my wife and daughter, but I had regained something more precious: my freedom. The door slammed behind me, the echo reverberating in the hollow pit where my heart used to be. But as I drove through the dark streets, headlights cutting through the oppressive night, something in me snapped. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the thought of them walking away unscathed, free to live off my sacrifices. The thought of him, Bob, smirking at my expense, thinking he'd stolen my life from under my nose. I wasn't going to let it happen. I turned the car around, gripping the wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. By the time I pulled back into the driveway, the anger was no longer simmering. It was a raging inferno. The front door creaked open as I stepped inside. Laura was on the phone, her voice hushed but frantic. "Bob, he knows. No, he didn't take it well. He—" "What?" Her head jerked toward me, her expression freezing. "I'll call you back." She hung up and straightened, trying to regain her composure. "Alex, you need to calm down." "Calm down?" I interrupted, my voice a low growl. "You think I'm here to talk?" Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. She flinched, glancing toward it, her expression flickering with panic. "You need to leave before this gets worse." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, stepping closer. "Who's at the door, Laura?" "Let me guess. Bob." Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. I walked past her, yanking the door open. And there he was, Bob, in all his smug, self-righteous glory. He didn't even flinch. "Alex," he said smoothly, his tone condescending, "let's talk about this man to man. You're being unreasonable." Before he could finish, I slammed my fist into his face. The satisfying crack of his nose breaking filled the air. He stumbled back, clutching his face, as blood streamed between his fingers. "Alex!" Laura screamed, rushing toward me. "Stop! You're acting crazy!" "Crazy?" I said, rounding on her. "You've been lying to me for God knows how long, stealing from me, and you think I'm the crazy one?" Bob groaned, pulling himself to his feet. "You're gonna regret that," he spat, his voice muffled by his bloodied nose. "Oh, I don't think I will," I replied, advancing on him. He swung at me, but it was clumsy. He wasn't a fighter, just a leech who'd never faced consequences. I ducked easily and landed another punch, this time to his gut. He doubled over, wheezing, and I grabbed him by the collar, shoving him against the wall. "You thought you could take everything from me?" I hissed. "You thought I'd just roll over?" "Alex, stop!" Laura cried, grabbing my arm. I shrugged her off, turning to her with a glare. "You don't get to stop this. You brought this into our home. You brought him into my life." "Listen," Bob started, but I slammed him against the wall again, cutting him off. His head hit the drywall with a dull thud and he groaned. "You're pathetic," I said, my voice dripping with venom. "You couldn't build a life of your own, so you tried to take mine." "Alex, please," Laura pleaded. "You're better than this." I laughed bitterly. "Better? I was better when I trusted you. Look where that got me." The commotion must have roused Maggie, who appeared at the top of the stairs. Her face went pale as she took in the scene. Bob slumped against the wall, bleeding and groaning, me standing over him with clenched fists, and Laura in tears. "Dad, stop!" she screamed, her voice cracking. I looked up at her, my jaw tightening. You knew about this. You helped them." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. "Dad, I'm sorry, I didn't—" "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't even try. You're as complicit as they are." She crumbled, sinking to her knees on the stairs, sobbing. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about her feelings. This was about justice. I turned back to Bob. He was barely conscious, slumped on the floor like the pathetic parasite he was. I leaned down, grabbing his chin and forcing him to look at me. "You're going to leave," I said, my voice cold and deadly. "You're going to get out of my house, my life, and this town. And if I ever see your face again, you won't be walking away next time." He nodded weakly, too broken to argue. I stood up and turned to Laura. "You want him so badly? Go with him. But you're not taking another cent of mine. The house, the cars, the bank accounts, they're all mine. You can leave with the clothes on your back." Her eyes widened. "Alex, you can't—" "I already did." I smiled bitterly. "You'll find the paperwork in my office. Everything's been transferred to my name." Her face crumpled. "You're destroying us." "No," I said, my voice low. "You destroyed us." I walked out the door, leaving them both in the ruins of the life they had tried to steal. As I drove away, the adrenaline coursing through me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. For the first time, I wasn't the victim. This wasn't forgiveness. This wasn't turning the other cheek. This was justice. The morning came, gray and heavy, mirroring the weight in my chest. But that weight wasn't sadness. It was purpose. I spent the early hours in my office, working through every detail of my plan. By the time the sun clawed its way into the sky, I was ready to detonate the bomb that would obliterate Laura's world. I started with her mother, Patricia, a manipulative puppet master who had spent years undermining me with passive-aggressive comments and meddling advice. She had always adored Bob, often remarking that he was the real man of the family. I'd tolerated her out of respect, but now I saw her for what she truly was, the root of Laura's entitlement. Patricia's beloved vacation home in Florida, which she often lorded over family gatherings, had been purchased under a shared LLC with Laura and me, one she insisted on years ago to protect family assets. What she didn't know was that I had quietly consolidated the LLC's control in my name over time. While sipping my coffee, I called her. "Alex," she answered briskly. "You've got some nerve after last night." "Good morning, Patricia," I said, keeping my tone even. "Just wanted to let you know I'm selling the Florida property. You should check your email for the notification." "What?" she screeched, her voice shrill enough to make me pull the phone from my ear. "You can't do that." "I can, and I did," I replied. "And don't bother calling your lawyer. The paperwork is clean. All proceeds will be deposited into my account." "You bastard," she shouted. "You're going to regret this." "I regret marrying into your miserable family," I said, cutting her off. "Goodbye, Patricia." Next, I moved on to Laura's sister, Diane. Diane had been Laura's confidant, her partner in gossip and judgment, the one who had smirked at me during family dinners as if I were the butt of an inside joke. I'd always suspected she knew more about Laura's life than she let on, and my suspicions were confirmed when I found a string of emails between the two of them while combing through Laura's laptop. Diane, it seemed, had helped cover for the affair, even creating fake alibis for Laura when she was working late. I paid a visit to Diane's employer. Armed with the emails, I requested a meeting with her boss, a stiff man with a penchant for propriety. I laid the evidence on his desk, showing how Diane had used company resources, her work email and company car, for personal schemes. Within 20 minutes, she was fired. By the time she called me in a rage, I was already back in my car, smiling as her furious voice filled my Bluetooth speaker. "How dare you, Alex? You've ruined me." "Not as much as you helped ruin me, Diane," I replied calmly. "Consider this a lesson in accountability." Finally, there was Bob. After the beating I gave him, he was lying low, but I wasn't finished with him. I reached out to a few friends in law enforcement, connections I'd cultivated over the years, as a thank you for handling security at company events. It didn't take long for them to uncover Bob's dirty laundry. Turns out, Uncle Bob had been skimming money off his business partner in his contracting firm. Fraud, embezzlement, the works. The arrest happened 2 days later. I didn't even have to lift a finger. The evidence practically delivered itself. I watched from a distance as police cars pulled into his driveway. He came out in handcuffs, his face swollen from our earlier altercation, screaming about a setup. By the time the officers stuffed him into the back seat, I was parked down the block, watching through my rearview mirror. I allowed myself a grim smile. His days of free rides and stolen lives were over. The fallout hit Laura like a tsunami. Patricia called her in tears, lamenting the loss of her precious Florida home. Diane showed up on her doorstep, jobless and furious, demanding help. And Bob, Well, Bob wasn't answering his phone anymore, his mugshot circulating online as his arrest became public knowledge. Laura tried to call me repeatedly, alternating between rage and desperation in her voicemails. Alex, you've taken this too far. Please, we can fix this. This is insane. You're destroying everyone. I didn't mean for it to go this way. Just call me back. We'll talk. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent her a single text. Actions have consequences. Enjoy California. I didn't just burn the bridges. I turned their entire empire of lies into ash. By the time I was done, Laura's family was fractured, broke, and scrambling for the pieces of their once comfortable lives. Meanwhile, I drove west, the horizon stretching endlessly before me, my heart lighter with every mile. They thought they'd bury me under their betrayal. Instead, I buried them. I was far from finished. Laura's family had spent years basking in smug superiority, their condescension dripping like venom at every holiday dinner, every family gathering. They treated me like a footnote in their legacy, a man there to prop up Laura's lifestyle while they looked down their noses at me. Now it was time to make sure they felt every ounce of pain they'd inflicted or enabled. I didn't just want to hurt them. I wanted them to know why it was happening. I started with Laura's brother-in-law, Mark. Mark was married to Diane, and he'd always been the silent observer at family events, the one who smirked at my discomfort but kept his hands clean. What nobody knew, including Diane, was that Mark had been dipping his fingers into a honeypot of his own. His business trips were thinly veiled excuses to see a mistress in another state. I'd come across an old text thread between Mark and his mistress while combing through Diane's emails. Apparently, Diane had caught wind of the affair, but decided to ignore it in exchange for financial stability. It was a mutually assured destruction scenario, or so they thought. I made an anonymous call to Mark's mistress. I told her Diane had been bragging about the affair to her friends, claiming she had no problem letting it happen as long as the money kept flowing. Furious, the mistress blew up Mark's phone, leaving a series of fiery voicemails that Diane found when she snooped later that night. By morning, their marriage was in shambles. Diane called Laura in hysterics, sobbing about how her husband was just as bad as Alex. That alone was worth every second of planning. Next, I turned my sights on Patricia's precious reputation. As the matriarch, she cultivated an image of perfection, graceful, generous, morally impeccable. She hosted charity galas, served on local boards, and relished being the picture of virtue. But Patricia had skeletons, and I had the key to her closet. Years ago, during a drunken argument at a family party, Bob had let slip that Patricia once embezzled funds from one of her charities to cover a gambling debt. I didn't think much of it at the time, chalking it up to his typical braggadocio. But now, it was ammunition. I gathered the financial records, which were conveniently buried in Laura's attic among old tax files. A quick email to the charity's current leadership was all it took. Within days, whispers began circulating. Patricia's name was smeared across social media and local news outlets. Her photo, once gracing charity brochures, was now featured in articles about greed and betrayal. She called Laura, frantic and desperate. "It's all lies," she screamed. "Someone's out to get me." "You mean someone like Alex?" Laura shot back, her voice sharp. "Maybe this is karma, Mom." That was the first time I'd smiled in days. Finally, I targeted the crown jewel of Laura's family pride, her father's old company, which had been handed down to Laura's cousin Greg. Greg had always been the family's golden boy, the one who could do no wrong. His construction business was thriving, or so they claimed. I paid a visit to one of the contractors who worked under Greg, a man named Phil. Over a few beers at a dive bar, I learned that Greg had been cutting corners, using substandard materials and pocketing the difference. Phil wasn't happy about it, but he didn't want to lose his job by blowing the whistle. That's where I came in. I leaked the details to a local journalist, someone hungry for a big scoop. Within a week, Greg's company was under investigation. Clients pulled out of contracts, investors bailed, and lawsuits piled up. The Golden Boy was now a tarnished pariah. The aftermath was beautiful chaos. Laura's family turned on each other like a pack of rabid dogs. Patricia blamed Diane for not controlling her husband. Diane accused Patricia of being a narcissistic tyrant. Greg pointed fingers at everyone, claiming they'd distracted him from his work. Laura, caught in the middle, was overwhelmed by the carnage. She tried calling me again. I ignored her. She tried emailing me, pleading for a meeting to talk things out. I didn't respond. Instead, I sent her a single package, a photo of our wedding day, torn neatly in half. On the back, I wrote, "You took my life apart. Now you know what it feels like." As I sat in a quiet motel room far away from the wreckage, I felt no remorse, no second thoughts. Laura's family had thrived on deception, manipulation, and entitlement for years, thinking they were untouchable. They thought they could take from me without consequence. They were wrong, and now they would spend the rest of their lives trying to claw their way out of the ruins I left behind. The destruction I left in my wake was absolute. Laura's family, once perched atop their pedestal of smug superiority, had been reduced to infighting, lawsuits, and public disgrace. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. There was one last move to make, one final twist of the knife, to ensure they never forgot the lesson I'd taught them. I still hadn't dealt with Laura herself. Weeks passed. I'd relocated to a small cabin far from the city, somewhere quiet, where no one knew my name. But the silence didn't bring peace. It only amplified the dark symphony of my plans. Laura had been silent too, save for a few desperate attempts to contact me. I ignored everyone, waiting until the perfect moment. When it came, it was glorious. Laura had retreated to her parents' home, the once pristine estate now a crumbling symbol of their downfall. Patricia's scandal had drained their savings. Diane had moved back in after her divorce, dragging her 2 kids with her. Greg, now bankrupt, was living in the guest house, a shadow of the golden boy he'd once been. Laura was stuck in the middle, holding together the fractured remnants of her family. She was vulnerable, desperate, and more importantly, distracted. I used that distraction to my advantage. The first strike was financial. I filed a lawsuit against Laura for misappropriation of marital funds. The case was airtight. Her affair, the diverted money for Bob's indulgences, and her attempt to siphon college savings for Maggie, all meticulously documented. When she was served, she called me immediately. "Alex," she said, her voice trembling. "What is this? A lawsuit? Haven't you done enough?" "Not yet," I replied coldly. "You thought you could use me as a stepping stone for your new life. Now you'll see how it feels to have everything taken from you." She tried to fight it, but she had no legal footing. The court ordered her to repay the stolen funds, which meant selling what little remained of her possessions. By the end of it, she was penniless, just like the rest of her family. The second strike was public. I sent a detailed account of her betrayal, backed by evidence, to every friend, colleague, and social circle she valued. Photos of her with Bob, screenshots of texts, emails detailing their plans. It was all laid bare. Laura's reputation, once pristine, was shredded. Her friends ghosted her. The charity circles she loved so much blacklisted her. Even Maggie, furious at the humiliation, moved in with one of her friends to escape the fallout. The final strike, though, was personal. I visited her one last time, standing on the threshold of the crumbling mansion where her family had once held lavish parties. She opened the door, her face pale and gaunt, the shadows under her eyes a testament to sleepless nights. "Alex," she started, her voice weak. I cut her off. "I just wanted to see you one last time," I said, my tone devoid of emotion. She blinked, unsure how to respond. "You always said you deserved better," I continued, stepping closer. "Well, now you've got it. A life without me. A life with your precious Bob, wherever he's rotting now." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to end like this. I made a mistake, Alex. I was selfish. But we were happy once, weren't we?" I stared at her, the woman I'd loved and sacrificed for, now reduced to a shell of her former self. "We were," I said quietly. "But you killed that life, Laura. And now I've buried it." I turned and walked away, ignoring her sobs as the door closed behind me. As I drove back to my cabin, the weight of it all began to lift. I hadn't just destroyed Laura and her family. I'd dismantled the illusion they'd built around themselves. The lie that they were untouchable. They were exposed now, naked in their failure, with no one to blame but themselves. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. I'd lost everything, yes, but in doing so, I'd reclaimed something far more valuable, my self-respect. And as the road stretched endlessly ahead of me, I knew one thing for certain. They'd never forget me, and I'd never look back.